Welcome to the Bryan Callen Show. My guest is Stephen Kotler. We'll get into that, but first, a little housekeeping. Come see me, Boston, Massachusetts, Laugh Boston. I am going to be at Laugh Boston December 29, 30, and 31. San Diego Comedy, Mic Drop Comedy Club, January 5, 6, 7. Fort Wayne, Indiana, Summit Comedy Club. Fort Wayne, Indiana, never been. But January 13 and 14, Dania, Florida. Half hour outside of Miami. Come get some at the Improv, Dania Improv, January 19, 20, 21. Nashville, Tennessee, Zanies, March 2, 3, and 4. Go to bryancallen.com for everything as usual. This podcast brought to you by Toehold, best flip-flops on planet Earth. Shop toehold.com. Over 500 steps go into making these flip-flops. They are the only flip-flops you will ever need in your life. Are they expensive? They're the most expensive, but they're worth it. I promise. You can spend $400 on Beats, those headphones. I just bought my daughter Beats, okay, for headphones. So, yeah, we charge $350, $400 for flip-flops, but they're the best flip-flops, and they're the best thing you can do for your feet. So, you're welcome. Now, without further ado, we've got a man my age, Stephen Kotler, who studies flow. He's basically a flow scientist. He's
an old man.
Yeah, an old man. But Kotler is kind of defying age. He became a park skier at that age. What that means is he jumps, he does flips, he does all kinds of crazy shit. He was like, that sport, you're done at 35. And he was like, well, let me see what I can do. He's written a bunch of nonfiction books, Abundance, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, The Art of Impossible. I mean, he is fascinated with performance, and he's fascinated with the notion of flow and how you can do things you didn't think you could do, and part of it's incremental progress. He talks about in our country, growing old, staying rad. He literally put his own body to the test. He was like, let me see if I can apply all these lessons I've studied, all the science I've studied. Let me see if I can apply it to myself in real time, doing something people say is impossible, which is trick skiing, park skiing, doing dangerous stunts on skis, with a guy who's an expert. And let me see if I can actually, surprise myself and get into flow. And I got to be honest, the book's fascinating. The book is fascinating. He's fascinating. He's given several talks. And when you actually go down the rabbit hole of what flow is and how you can generate flow, there are techniques where you can get yourself into the zone, where you can get yourself into a situation where you actually shut your brain down. They used to think you use more of your brain. It may be that you actually stop thinking. And, what the Buddhists say is, it takes over. It takes over. Like when I do Kung Fu.
Don't.
I'm saying, dude, if I'm going to fight you, and, and by you, I mean you and your group, like you come at me, if it's one-on-one, I'm going to do my shit. You know what I'm saying?
Jesus.
I know, but I'm going to do my shit. I'm going to surprise you. Okay? And know that I'm going to surprise you. Okay? But if you come at me with 4 or 5 of your guys, I'm going to let it take over. I'm going to let it take over. Okay? Can you stop? What? I'm just saying that I'm going to stop thinking and I'm going to start moving with extreme prejudice. But this is not about Kung Fu. No. I mean, it is. It is. It's about Kung Fu mindset. Okay? That's flow. That's the zone. Stephen Kotler is a master at this. He studied it. He's applied it to his own life. Nar Country is the book about that experience. And we had a great podcast. So please enjoy Stephen Kotler on the Bryan Callen Show. See you soon.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro song. Bryan Callen, it's one hell of an intro song. His comedy is marvelous. He's a genius in world politics.
Well, Stephen Kotler, welcome. I'm a fan. I read in our country, which we're going to talk about, Abundance, The Art of Impossible, but you've written all the books. You've written like 17 books. It's obnoxious, actually.
It's 14.
Is it
I'm not
14?
done till I have a shelf, though.
Dude.
Like I want a full shelf, and I'm talking about like in one of those old school,
It's an outrage.
big libraries.
Well, West of Jesus, there's
Second one.
there are just a bunch of books I have to read now but I've listened to your lectures, and what I was really pumped about was that I've interviewed a lot of people, and they do a lot of research, and they do a lot of primary research, they do a lot of secondary research, and they write a book. Could be a book about whatever it might be, and then they have a nifty title. You have been studying flow and peak performance aging and everything else forever, and now you finally put it to the test in such an extreme way. Like the shit you were talking about as I'm reading this stuff, you learn how to park ski. And if you don't know what park skiing is, it's that trick shit that you do when you jump in the air and twirl, and it's the most dangerous thing. And you did it at 53, ladies and gentlemen.
I did.
And I kept reading, I go, this guy's a fucking nut. Like I always think of myself as crazy, and then I read about somebody who makes me feel like I'm a Boy Scout. So congratulations on being alive. But I mean, it was such an interesting book in that sense. And I just appreciate that you were willing to fucking put your words to the test. You basically have been talking about this, and you go, I'm going to be the most extreme example and prove that this actually works.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Because usually the experiments on myself come first.
Yeah.
And I just don't talk about them. Yeah. Right? Like I usually always start there, because otherwise I'm just not comfortable enough that there's a there that I'm going to be able to talk about in any learned way. Yeah. Like it can't be that removed from me. Otherwise, I'm not a talented enough writer to pull it off. Whatever it is, I just usually keep the experiments out of it. And especially like, I've been doing this a very long time, but like guys like Tim Ferriss came along and the experiments were sort of their thing. And I was like, okay, that's their thing. I've just been doing the same thing, but whatever, like let it be their thing. But it was fun to actually like.
Well, Tim does stuff, but let's be honest. Hey, can you close that just in case there's. Tim will experiment on his own body, but there's a big difference. Like, Hemingway did a lot of stuff, right? Hemingway drove an ambulance in the Spanish-American War, I think, and various stuff. And it's all good. And maybe did some boxing, jumped around a ring a little bit, and then maybe did some bullfighting, but not really. Like, I think there's a big difference. I actually was racking my brain to find who had done something that required this kind of physical exertion, this kind of wear and tear, and this kind of risk. And I came up short.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. I don't think of it that way. Part of it is after spending so much time around, professional action and adventure sport athletes, I see what they do and I think, oh my God, I can't go near that. That's insane to me. So, I don't even rate on the scale compared to, the folks I know, and what they do. Sometimes.
But you got to add in the fact that these people you're talking about the X Games a lot in the book. Yeah, they're in their 20s, fucking crazy. That's why my joke is that 18-year-olds shouldn't be allowed to vote because they have terrible ideas like fucking parkour. Okay, all right. God bless you. I don't want you choosing my leaders. All right, your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. You fucking maniac. Like I cringe. I'm like, be careful. Okay, good, all good. You flirt with your own mortality. Dude, you were 53, already with a host of broken bones, and you were like, I'm going to do this. And here's my theory on it, and you touch on it. Here's another thing you did in the book I haven't heard about. You brought it up many times in the book, getting punched in the arm by jocks. Basically proven that you're not a pussy.
So the book is about peak performance aging, and one of the things that came out of adult development, right, which is the field of how do we grow up. And this was mostly George Valiant's work, who was the last caretaker of the Harvard. There are two studies in Boston, 100-year studies of adult development. One was done on Harvard graduates, and one was done, they went, oh, wow, those are all rich Harvard graduates, so let's redo it on just working class Boston folks. George ended up as the last caretaker of that information. And one of the things he discovered is there are gateways in adult development, right? Like there's all kinds of really neat stuff that we've learned, that like new kinds of intelligence and wisdom and empathy and creativity that come online in your 50s, but only if you've passed through these thresholds. And the first one is the thresholds of identity by age 30. And by 40, it's match fit, which is an economics term for there's a tight fit between who you are and your strengths and your values and how you like to live and what you do for a living or what you do with the bulk of your time. But by 50, it's forgiveness. You have to forgive those folks who have done you wrong and sort of forgive yourself. And most of that stuff I had sort of worked through, but as I didn't get along with the jocks as a kid, and I lost a lot of fights over a long period of time, and that never really, like it just wasn't, it was hard to put down. It never quite went away. And one of the reasons I came up with this crazy park skiing quest was maybe if I tried to turn myself into one of the jocks, if I really like walked a mile in their moccasins kind of thing, maybe that, I didn't have any other ideas, right? I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but nothing else has worked. Let's try this. And it was one of the things that I embarked on the quest for. It was a little extra added motivation for sure.
It was gutsy, bro. It was so gutsy though, because that's dicey. That's dicey territory to start talking about how you were picked on as a kid and then seeing if it works. But it made, to me, all the sense in the world.
I also wanted to write a book about like shit that men deal with all the time and don't ever talk about.
Right.
And especially our generation, we're the same age, where like
you don't complain, you don't cry.
And I grew up in a world where like men didn't have emotions at all. I mean, the most rebellious thing in the world you could be.
My joke is that
give somebody a hug in the 70s and 80s as a man. Give another man a hug. Yeah. Like
my father always considered therapy. He talked to his buddy who was seeing a therapist. He goes, he's seeing a fucking therapist. He needs therapy. Like if I ever cried, are you kidding? He'd be like, "What are you, a leftist? What the fuck's going on?" You know?
Exactly.
So we grew up.
Yeah, so you grew up in this world where you couldn't have emotion, you couldn't have any of those things, and it was it was just a way to see if I could settle that score. But I really wanted to talk about a lot of the heavy, like in a fun way. I wanted to talk about some of the shame issues and like just some of the masculinity shit that men carry around, and nobody, especially today, you really can't talk, because the last thing anyone wants to hear is a man talking about like male.
You guys have had your time. Shut up.
Like shut the fuck up.
You don't matter.
And that's fair. Yeah. Totally.
Not really, but okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can. It's fair. Meaning you get to have your opinion.
It may be fair, but what I think the book shows is that there's a real vulnerability in the book. It's not just about being naked. Oh, there we go. Now,
there we go.
You guys wanted to see it. We gave it to you. Kotler's torso. Kotler's fucking torso. Okay? Broken, scarred, battered, but still shredded. You need a tan like me.
I do need
a tan. That's a beautiful sort of like a beautiful jaundiced look. I like that. Same thing with me.
Thank
I
you.
like it. My friend's like, you look yellow. I'm like, fuck off. But you
I write fucking books for a living. What do you think happens?
You do more. You fucking trick ski. You park ski. But that was what I thought was so interesting. I want you to dilate on sort of identity, on match. Is it matchmaking?
Match fit or match quality.
Match fit, and then forgiveness.
And then self-forgiveness.
So these three concepts came to you from a
no. It showed up in the work of George Valiant and watching the Harvard adult development studies. Like in psychology, they talk about moderators. Moderators is a fancy word for an if-then condition.
Yeah.
And some of the early work came out of like goal theory and the science of goal-directed behavior and things like that. They've started to find moderators, and they
go like this because you have dust. I mean, you have not dust, lint. It would have bugged the shit out of me.
It would have looked really good on camera.
Yeah, exactly. He's got
this
lint
sexy
on his neck.
thing coming off his neck,
taking off his shirt.
It's excellent.
Right, go on.
What was I saying?
You were saying that I said the three stages
so
came from.
Yeah, so identity. And this identity, the crisis of identity, I mean, Eric Erikson identified that way back. He thought it was a crisis that sort of was 12 to 18, and you'd have to sort of solve it by 18. And what the study showed is that, no, it actually stretches on to longer. But if you don't solve it by the time you're 30, you start to have problems because by 40, you need match fit, right? And if you don't know who you are, how the fuck do you figure out what the match is between who you are and how you live in this world? which is the next thing you have to.
But is identity identifying what you want?
No, identity is who are you? Who are you as a person? The crisis of identity.
What does that mean? Where to place your energy?
No, however you identify as an individual. And everybody has different labels. Often by 30, it's a role. I am a father. I am a mother. I am a school teacher. I am it's those sorts of things. But it can be, you want to be clear on your sexuality. You want to be clear on all those big things, if you can be, right? Yeah. And it's mostly so you can get match fit and figure out, like, how do I live in the world? And it seems like the forgiveness thing is interesting, but it seems like it's what unlocks, first of all, empathy and wisdom. And one of the reasons, wisdom, which is a specific neurobiological trait, like certain areas of the brain are involved in it, it codes for certain things, and expertise are the two things that are neuroprotective against cognitive decline. Cognitive decline means slowing down of cognitive function. It becomes cognitive decline once I think it's below 50% of what normal function, and leads to dementia and Alzheimer's. And when they autopsy brains afterwards, they can find people with brains that are filled with plaques and tangles, all the signs of Alzheimer's, but they showed none of the symptoms. And it's always because they've got lifelong
hobbies or passions.
Learnings, basically, right? And it's the wisdom and the expertise that comes off of it because they form big neural nets in the brain. And usually if you get Alzheimer's dementia, it's like individual spots that tend to erode. So you have these big neural nets, they're protective and they're redundant against cognitive decline.
Yeah, you use the expression use it or lose it a lot.
It's, the old idea on aging, right? And it's the one I grew up with. It's probably the one you grew up with, which is like the long, slow rot theory, right? Our mental and physical skills decline over time. There's nothing we can do to stop the slide.
To be honest with you, I until I read this book, the value of this book, I swear to God, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but like I think about my age all the time, and I fight it, and I work out, and I'm always busy, but just hearing what's possible based on the research you did, just was like, I was like, fuck.
It was amazing because everything that they used to think declined over time, we now know it's a use it or lose it skill. It doesn't change the fact, like, your strength fibers, strength muscles start declining at 50, and they're going to keep going. They are going to decline. It's just that if you train properly, the remaining fibers more than compensate mostly for what is lost. And you can even start to gain skill. So, and it's like across the boards, VO2 max, which was something that every stamina goes, over 40, you're fucked, forget about it. And now they're measuring the VO2 max of like 85-year-old octogenarian triathletes, and they've got the VO2 max of like 35-year-old and 40.
That was fascinating in the book. I freaked out when I heard that because I bought into the fact I ride that Aerodyne bike. It's such a nightmare. But I was like, well, I got to just hold on to my VO2 max. But you can
extend it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of this stuff that you actually can extend, and some of it's weird. Like there's weird facts. Like, so if you want real new networks, right? You want memory protection and things like that. Exercise obviously matters hugely, which is one of the reasons this is so important. But it's not just exercise; it's balance and coordination, agility and coordination, changing movement. Certain things produce way more neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, than other stuff. So it's getting very, very, very specific, which is really, it's not just, use it or lose it was big enough news, right? But the fact that there's a recipe in a sense, which is really kind of amazing.
So then you've got identity, you've got matchmaking, a match fit, and then you've got
self-forgiveness.
And then self-forgiveness.
Self-forgiveness of others, forgiveness of others and self. And it's because we get access to new levels of wisdom and empathy. But if you can't forgive people, the parts of our brain, so wisdom, empathy, all this comes out of a part in our brain called the temporal parietal junction. It's basically right here. And it's the part of your brain that does perspective taking. So when you see things from another's perspective, or when you have an out-of-body experience, which is you're physically floating above your body, it's also a radically different shift in perspective. It's the same part of the brain going haywire in an out-of-body experience. Maybe haywire is a strong term, but having a weird surge. But it's this portion of your brain that seems to be where wisdom and empathy develop, and something about, they don't quite know why yet, But something about forgiveness, if you don't get through that gateway, if you can't put the shit down, it seems to block some of the empathy. And the
I love that you're talking about forgiveness. And you're breaking it down scientifically. The Christians have been saying this, right? It's like religion has been. I can just see all the religious people going, "We've been fucking saying it for 2,500 years, bro." You know. So do you find as you get older that do you find yourself getting more curious about the ancient mythologies, the religions that are ever present in our lives, or are you still an avowed atheist?
I've never been an avowed atheist.
I see how I fed you that.
Yeah, I'm a very, 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 very strong agnostic, and I actually think I don't get atheists because to me it's a belief like any other belief, and I'm a strong agnostic because I don't know. Right. Like the universe is just bigger than I can comprehend, correct. And the amount of arrogance it takes to say, "Oh, I know this for sure." Yeah. I'm amazed by, like, wherever you, like, religious, atheist, like, wherever you fall, I'm just amazed by your certainty. Like,
that's how I feel.
Okay?
I'm not about to be like bullshit, and I get there, and God's like, now you want to be my friend? You know what I mean? I don't know, man. I'm the same way. I would never presume to be that sure
about anything.
Rationality, you know? What I really love, though, is just, I think it feels like you're on the forefront of this sort of idea of cognitive aging and peak performance aging. And so I love these things, but talk a little bit about, because I'm a huge believer in this too, like just incremental improvements. Like
so
tiny little, like instead of looking at just fucking one step at a time, instead of looking at the top of the mountain, right?
So we have to talk a little bit about flow.
Yes.
For this to make sense. Flow, which is what at the heart of all of my work, if you are listening and don't know what flow is, it's an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best, right? Those in the zone moments, you get so focused on everything you're doing that everything else vanishes.
You're not thinking.
Right. So flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. So if you want more flow and all the benefits that come with it, the triggers are your toolkit. One of the most famous is what's known as the challenge skills balance. I don't care. Baby. And the challenge skills balance, so flow follows focus. It only shows up when all our attention is on the here and now. And we pay the most attention to the task at hand, to the here and now, when the challenge that we're facing slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch but not snap. So next step, and then we'll get to the 1 inch at a time idea, is that a bunch of years ago, the godfather of flow psychology, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, was sitting down with a Google mathematician, and they tried to put a number. Can we put a rate, an actual number on the difference between challenge and skills? And they did a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and they came up with 4%. It wasn't a real number. It was a metaphor.
4%?
4%, okay. Meaning we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task is 4% greater than the skills we bring to it. So you're stretching, but not snapping.
Right.
So allostatic overload or allostatic load is essentially all the bad shit that's ever happened to you in your life, all the tragedy, emotional and physical, otherwise, it's the residual of it. Right, and it builds up in our nervous system, and it's called allostatic load or allostatic overload. It's often talked about around burnout. You hear it a lot when they talk about burnout. But we started to realize is that 4% challenge skills sweet spot, because of allostatic overload, is shrunken in older adults. They don't even know. So you still sort of feel like the athlete you were in your 20s, and you may have the physical skills to be that person, but the amount of fear has gone up so much and you haven't noticed. And so I stopped and I was like, okay, I think that's probably true with me because I've broken so many bones and I really didn't want to get injured, which is a strange thing to say. I'm going to teach myself how to park ski and I don't want to get injured.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Right. But that was
like the craziest shit you could choose.
You could possibly do. But the idea was, let's start with an existing motor pattern, something I can do 100% of the time with zero fear and 100% success rate or 95% success rate, and build 1 inch at a time.
And you're are you building neural, like, is it like sort of the myelin sheath?
First I wanted the new motor pattern. Yeah. And it was,
everything is that way, you know, boxing, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, you drill the same move over and over.
You want the same, and then you want, so I took what is known as, I took a deliberate play approach, which is different than deliberate practice. Is Anders Ericsson do the same thing over and over and over again, get your 10,000 hours, right? With slight improvement. repetition without repetition, deliberate play is do exactly what you did before, but just improv a tiny little bit on top of it, right? So it'd be the difference in MMA of literally like, I'm putting my weight in my right hip versus my left hip, right, for this move. Something really micro like that. That's sort of how I was playing with it, and it we just got good results right out of the gate. Like
good results in getting in the flow right away?
Well, it wasn't even so much. I mean, flow was, yes, there was a lot of flow, but no, I was actually making progress. Yeah. I mean, that like I knew there were going to be a couple tricks where like the first time I threw a 180, you're going to have to land backwards, right? I was going to have to like get over it and just, I'm going to have to figure out how to land backwards.
Just think about my knees breaking.
It's what was so surprising to me is how I actually understood. Like as soon as I landed backwards, my body knew what to do.
Yeah, like
it was a very weird thing because I was so terrified of it, and like my body actually knew what to do, and it was a lot of stuff like that along the way where like I'd have to push, but I was doing it in such a way that like what I was finding on the other side of the pushing, which was new for me, was something I could build upon rather than something like, oh, wow, that's too hard. It's unattainable. This was, oh, I can work with this. And that was, I mean, the fun of it, and you may know this, is, to suddenly find yourself at 53 years old getting better at a sport like park skiing was nuts. Like it was
nuts.
That's
not
so
supposed
fun.
to belong to 50.
Well, that was the real thing that was interesting is that was really where one of the places the book started is there was all these theories out of network neuroscience, neural dynamics, but how the network level of the brain works. Embodied cognition, which is basically the science of like, hey, we're not just heads on sticks. Our brains are actually embedded in in our bodies, right? Yeah. And flow science that said, hey, wait a minute, old dogs should be able to learn new tricks. Like all this idea that old dogs can't learn new tricks, it's like I'm reading theory after theory after theory, and it's all saying this, if you put these things together, this should work. And park skiing was a great test because it's, there are 12 or 13, 14 different reasons that it's biologically supposed to be impossible for anybody over the age of 35 or 40 to learn how to park ski. Right. And
until Stephen Kotler came along.
It was a bunch of scientists in labs all over the world who did the actual like.
They weren't doing 180s and 360s.
They did not put it to the test. Yes, I did.
Don't be modest. It annoys me. Just
sorry.
fucking brag. Go on. No, I hear you. But still, you still had to put it to the test. I know. I hear you. I had to cut you off because I know all the science. But you were following that maniac.
Yes,
Ryan.
I was.
By the way, how about the blue eyes on that kid?
Yeah,
and the hair. Congratulations.
It's frightening, right?
It's obnoxious, and he can ski like that. But like that was what was, forget stretching. I mean, you can't really do. You can't do.
What kind of segue was that?
No. I said forget
stretching.
No, stretching like as in doing 4% more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, you got to stretch.
Fuck yoga.
Yeah, fuck yoga. No, but. Like when you're skiing, when you're park skiing, it's kind of hard not to do it full. I mean, it's kind of hard not. You got to get a certain amount of speed to jump.
Yeah, that was. When
he told you to jump and you saw the rocks below you, like just fucking do it, bro. Just some of those things, like if you chicken out last minute, it's problematic.
You actually can't. Yeah, right. You do have to, and a lot of those things you do have to commit. And the one thing that I've definitely learned, and I've learned it again. Coming back into this season, it's day 6 of the season. You have to sort of relearn your tricks, and you fool yourself. I've been fooling myself trying to relearn them slowly. You know what happens when you try to relearn a park trick slowly? You fall down.
Yeah,
you fall down. Yeah, and it freaking hurts.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Park skiing doesn't care. I also felt like when I read the book, I was like, look, man, it's all good you did this, and I love the book, but at the same time, like. That was then. It's not something you got to just keep doing. It's not like you can take a year off and come back out.
You definitely have to keep doing. Well, no, this is something I learned years ago. When I was learning how to rock climb, when I was learning how to surf, it's the same thing. In all action sports, for me, this may not be for other people. I've been around phenomenal athletes who can like show up once a week or twice a week and make progress.
He's
not
20.
me. Yeah, I got to show up 4 times a week. and work like 2 to 4 hours. Otherwise, I'm going backwards.
Yeah.
Right. That's just who I am. So I like.
Yeah, but that's the other thing I appreciated about the book. Very vulnerable. I mean, I wonder if there's any escape. It's constant work, no matter what you're doing, right?
I think, well, over 50, it definitely appears that if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards.
Yeah, but what I loved is your examples, right? So I went to an exhibit, a Picasso exhibit, and he was 90 years old. The dude was painting on a level as high as he was when he was 40. Then you use Stradivarius as an example. That
was one of the that was where one of
crazy.
the places the book came from.
Like the way it was? Is that where you started?
No, I started a whole bunch of different places. I'll give you an order. So let me tell you the Stradivarius thing. The Stradivarius thing, this was very early on, long before it was a book. But I wanted to write a novel. It'd been a long time since I wrote. My first book was a novel, and I wrote a couple recently, but this was in a long gap. And I was like, oh, I'll write a book. And I always sort of wanted to write a book about a cat burglar. And it was for flow reasons. There's a bunch of Csikszentmihalyi's early work on juvenile delinquency. And the argument is that a lot of the things juvenile delinquents, quote unquote, do, graffiti, fighting, petty theft, they're doing to regulate their nervous system and try to drive themselves into flow. Ooh. And it's about flow seeking, not moral transgression.
Juice.
Exactly. And so I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to make a cat burglar who's like the grown-up version of one of these flow kids, juvenile delinquents. And I was like, okay, well, my cat burglar, what's she going to steal? I want something cool. And I was like, after thinking about it for a while, I settled on rare musical instruments. Next question. What are the most expensive musical instruments in history, right? And I start looking into this, and I realized that Stradivarius, one guy in the 1600s, has built half of the most valuable musical instruments in history, which is bizarre.
So bizarre.
That'd be like one painter has painted half of the most. It doesn't even make any sense.
After I read your book, I kind of did a little research.
Yeah, you get in line.
He was obsessed about fucking the glue. And the kind of glue he used.
And the strings too.
I mean, the whole
it was amazing.
Thing, dude.
Yeah. But so I'm reading about Stradivarius, and I realized that he had made. So this is, I still believe, the long, slow rot theory of aging at this point. And I'm reading whatever I was reading, and it said he made 2 of his most famous violins or musical instruments when he was 92 years old. And I went, wait a minute. If this is true, everything I know about aging has to be wrong, because there's no way a 92-year-old man with cognitive decline, with lack of motor skills and motor coordination, all the things that are supposed to go away, you can't build priceless violins, right? It doesn't make any sense. So that was one of the...
By hand.
Yeah, there were a bunch of, a lot of the puzzle pieces. So my wife and I run, and did for a very long time, an animal sanctuary. We do hospice care. So we've had 700 hospice cases have passed through our lives, and there's a movement in canine welfare to double canine lifespan, and there's really high-tech approaches and there's low-tech, and we're sort of in the middle. We do some flow science stuff, some evolutionary psychology stuff, and some nutrition stuff, but we get amazing results. Like, we'll get dogs, they'll come from vets, and the vet will be like, don't get very attached, this dog's got a month, 2 to live, and we'll sort of institute our healing protocol, and we'll get 5 or 6 more years of life out of these animals. And we take our dogs into the backcountry off leash every day, so they'll do 5-7 miles up and down mountains when they're supposed to be dead in a month. And so we were seeing this hundreds of dogs, not just a couple, hundreds and hundreds of dogs over 20 years at this point. So I knew something was wrong. I was like, this doesn't, like, whatever they're saying about aging, like, we're getting results that don't even make any sense, and we're not doing, like, we've increased the quality of their food, and we've matched their diet to what the sort of dogs evolved to eat, but we've just all we did was create an environment very similar to what dogs evolved in, and that's most of what we did. And suddenly, they just blossomed. So I knew something was wonky, because that didn't make any sense. The Stradivarius thing was another hole, and then what really changed for me, so the book was percolating, but it was the last conversation I had with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi before he died.
You actually had a conversation with
him? Yeah, we've known each other for a while.
Wow.
But so you get a kick out of this, a funny story. One, I knew he'd had a stroke, and I hadn't talked to him, and I knew he was starting to improve, but I wanted to check in on him. It had been a bunch of years since I talked to him, and they had just translated. They published a couple new flow textbooks, and in doing so, they translated a bunch of old interviews with Csikszentmihalyi that were in Italian into English. And I'm reading these interviews, and he's always been sort of an avid outdoors guy, right? And his students tell stories about how he would come to class with like black eyes and like things. We'd go into the backcountry and things would happen. And he worked on rock climbers early on, talked some of the early flow research was done on rock climbers. But I'm reading these interviews, and he's like name dropping 1960s era Yosemite Valley climbers, like hardcore people. And I'm like, there's no way he would have known these people if he wasn't really serious about this stuff. And I just had this, it was so really weird. I had this weird idea. So I called him. I was like, he answers the phone. And I was like, Mike, you got to tell me. I've been reading all your old stuff. And I know you in your TED Talk, you say that you first stumbled onto flow in concentration camps. And then you did all this research on artists. But tell me the truth. You were an action sport athlete. You were getting into flow in the mountains as a rock climber, as a mountaineer, and you didn't know how to talk about that because that was, I mean, even me writing about action sports in the early thousands was hard enough. Trying to do it in the 60s when he was writing Beyond, right? You could never do it.
Like, it sounded like almost like magic.
Right.
'Cause he used conductors, painters, rock climbers, and surgeons. Yeah, and talked about how they get, it was how they get into flow.
It started, I mean, his famous one is artists, right? Like he started with artists.
That's right. Painters. That's right.
He was at the University of Chicago, and he was trying to figure out like why they were so invested in these paintings, and the minute they were done, they didn't care about the work anymore. They put it on the side. Part of it was just
the paints.
It was just about the painting. It wasn't about the fame, the success, all the things that people thought it was going to be about. It was just about the art.
Continue what you were saying, because I interrupted.
So, anyways,
because you said you.
So I called him up to asked him this ridiculous question, right? Yeah. Like, and there's this huge pause, 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, and I'm like, holy shit, I've just mortally offended the godfather of flow. It's like, whoa, oh shit. And finally, his voice was really deep. Like, well, Stephen, you got to be careful. I was like, what? And I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, this stroke got into his brain. Like he lost the thread. Yeah. Like right? I'm like, oh, fuck. And so I sit there and I didn't know what to do. And after about a minute, I'm like, okay, I just got to, there's nothing to do. I was like, Mike, what do I have to be careful about? He was like, you got to be careful. You do something your entire life for flow. You get to be my age, forget about climbing mountains. Sometimes you can't even get out of bed. You got to have a backup plan. You got to be careful. And I went, oh crap, this is the godfather of flow. It wasn't even like, it wasn't, you know,
and so he was a rock climber?
It was one, yeah, he was a mountaineer and a rock climber, and he did it his whole life for flow, and then he got to a point where he could no longer do it. And so he tells me to have a backup plan. And I'll get to why park skiing.
A backup plan to get back into flow?
Meaning, as you're going to age, have a backup plan for how you get into flow, because if you're locked out, and at that point, so I know, why would I learn to park ski? Skiing was always what I did for flow.
Yeah.
But I was a big mountain skier, which means the only way I'm getting into flow is doing 60 miles an hour down something very, very steep and really, really dangerous. And that's not super user-friendly in your 80s. And so I figured if I could learn to park ski, I could creatively interpret the mountain.
Yeah.
Getting to intermediate was going to be dangerous, and I knew that. But I knew once I got to intermediate, if I get to expert, great, whatever. But if I get to intermediate, there was going to be a million more ways I could get into flow much more safely on a mountain than just like diving down chutes at 70 miles an hour, right? And so I was like, okay, that's maybe my total backup plan, but this is where I'm starting. And so that was the final, like, there was a bunch of other stuff going on, but that was the catalyst when I was like, okay, yeah.
That's why I feel so incredibly lucky to be a stand-up comic, because flow for me has been probably, I didn't really think about it deeply, but I remember doing a show in Sacramento, and I was firing on all cylinders. It was just like one of those shows, because I was about to drop my special. So I had everything dialed in. And I remember I didn't have to think about anything I was saying. I didn't even have to think about the jokes. I swear to God, I was playing the audience the way you'd play an instrument. So you play it like the way you play, what is that? What's this thing?
Accordion?
Yeah, the fucking accordion. That instrument.
Not a crime.
No, I was going to say. But when you play that, or you play an instrument, or a reed instrument, you're regulating your breath, right? You're pulling back your. I swear to God, man, I was like this side of the audience, they're laughing too hard, they're going to get exhausted. So I would pull air back there, and I go, that guy, this part of the audience looks a little bit. I've been directing too much attention. Let me hit these guys. That guy's macho. I could do that. I was like, that guy's macho. He's not giving me much, so let me give him attention because he's going to say something. I was able to see every fucking person in that audience. I swear to God. And I started playing them. I was like, this side now looks like they're a little tired. So let me give them energy. Let me give you guys energy now, and let me pull energy back from you. So it was almost like I was playing. And the best way to describe it, I felt like I was playing the entire audience like woo, more air, pull air back here. And I didn't have to think of anything. But I've had so many of those experiences where you literally are not thinking about anything other than you just let it take over. You go because it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. It's what I was born for. And that's probably why nothing else is interesting to me. Like, you want to go rock climbing? Cool. Yeah. You want to go hunting? Yeah, we'll go hunting. You want to go, okay. The only thing that came close was maybe boxing, because I would always get nervous because I got to fight some fucking young dude who's going to hit me in the face, and I'm going to be dizzy for the next, But even that, everything pales in comparison. And I didn't really think about why. I always thought it's just what I'm made to do and stuff. No. And I have these lofty ideas of what an artist is, an original self-expression, blah, blah, blah. But I think if I'm really honest with myself, it's probably because my brain shuts off, or maybe it turns on. But I feel as honest as I ever have. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I don't have to think about anything. It's where I'm truly, maybe Schiller once said, man's never more himself than when at play, which is that thing you would do for its own sake. You would do it whether you got paid for it or not. And I guess that's the way.
One, I was listening to you talking, Tom Waits once said, songs are really fun things to do with air.
Ha ha! Fuck. Yes.
Right. But that's besides the point. What I was actually thinking is, because right and wrong, meaning you were making fun of yourself for having a definition of an artist that you were up on stage fulfilling. And what I want to say is that I think the point of flow is it matches our values and our strengths and things like that. So if you, one of the reasons you find so much flow on stage is also because you have these values that you're living into when you're on stage.
Yeah, yes. I actually think the best way to get to know yourself is to get really good at something. I believe that.
I agree with that.
And I also think that my God is honesty, truth. You spend a lot of your life lying to yourself. You spend a lot of your life pretending to be somebody you're not, right? I don't know if that's such a bad thing. I think, men I can speak for. Most of us are planning our escape. Most men. There's some men that just dull that and they fucking smoke weed and they just stare at a stupor and play video games all day. But for the most part, all of us are trying to get out of where we are right now and get somewhere better, right? It really is like being in jail in one way or another. But I think that for me, the battle is always about original self-expression, meaning I have to surprise myself, and meaning I have to be original and do something that I didn't know I had in me. And that means never getting too comfortable. I can't just keep telling the same fucking jokes, man. And that also means I got to really key in to what I honestly revere, what I am honestly afraid of, what I'm honestly angry about, and let me forgive. I really thought a lot about this with this book. I don't think there's any growth without forgiveness. And I just can't believe that a guy like yourself, who's a scientist essentially, or somebody who's studying flow from such a mathematical perspective, brought that shit into the book, because I think it's the most important aspect of the book. And I never thought about it until I read it. I was like, you can't move unless you forgive those that did you wrong, and forgive yourself for all your, I don't know, maybe who you were pretending to be for the longest time. I don't know. I don't know why
I definitely.
on that
I mean,
riff.
I'm. You know, I always say that with books, the secret to a great book is you have to tell the truth, and it's the third. Like you got to go all the way in.
Yeah, it was gutsy. You did it because it could have been.
It's funny because when I was doing it, it just felt organic. Like if you would have pointed it out and been like, "You're doing,"
I wouldn't have because it would have fucked you. Because you would have gotten in your head.
Yeah, it would have gotten in my head.
I don't know.
Too much.
And you shouldn't even hear this. I shouldn't even tell you this because I don't want to fuck you up for your next book. I mean, seriously, like I'm very guarded of people's talent because I don't want to be I don't want to be blowing smoke up your ass. Because you're going to aim for that.
But I do. I've learned the same lesson you've learned also, which is that like every one of my books, there's a communication challenge is the thing I want to tell you, and there's a style challenge is how I want to tell it artfully. But there's always something hard that I have to learn. In our country, the one thing that I'm really proud of is there aren't books that go day by. It's the first book about applied peak performance that I think has ever been written because you can't. Very few writers are willing to like try to go day by day through something without like they're terrified it's going to be boring. And I was too, right? Like, and it took a really long time. Right? How do you write a book about skiing that people who've never skied in their life are going to want to really like all that stuff? So there were a bunch of writing challenges that scared the pants off me, right? Going into it, wow, I don't know if like this is going to work at all. And this was, of the books that I've written, this was the one I was almost a year in before I was like, oh yeah, this might work. Like I had been
really?
I had
it
been
took
working
you a year.
I had been working on it for
what an act of faith that is.
Almost a year.
That's an act of faith.
When I finally was like, oh yeah, okay, now I'm seeing it start to work.
Wow.
It was a tricky
one.
Yeah,
by the way, I can't believe I didn't mention enough of that. The new book of your 14 is Nar Country. And if you read Art of Impossible or Abundance or, I mean, all of them have a lot to say and are just full of like what's possible in your life. But I just, this in particular, coming maybe from me at 55, selfishly, was just a door opener. I was just like, this is just so interesting to me. Because
I'm glad. Then my work here is done.
Yeah, dude, you literally you were guinea pig. And it could have gone south. Oh God,
it could have
You
gone
got
really.
Fucking T-boned by somebody. I mean,
dude, that like
you're too afraid to check. Don't tell me what's going on with my knees.
Yeah, that was one of them when I was
God.
so. I'll tell. Let me.
Yeah, tell the story.
The story. So we were skiing at Kirkwood, and we were skiing a feature called Lower Norm's Nose, and. Norm's nose. It's a giant nose that protrudes out of the mountain, right? And there's chutes all over it. And we had been working our way in, and Ryan had tried to ski this really aggressive chute, and it had slid. So he skied it, but he stayed right ahead of the snow and barely made it out alive. And but it slid. All the snow was gone from the rock now, and there was no way to go back. So I still had to go deeper onto the face. And I got to like the top of this chute. I was sideways into it, and the chute was like 15 feet below me. I'm on a side of a right rock wall. And as soon as I skied up onto it, the same thing happened again. The snow started to slide, and there was no I had to get into that chute. So there was no choice. It was go.
You had to jump.
You have to jump and land and turn.
That's so
and I had to do, and it was one of the crazier things I've had to do because it was jump, land, turn, and it's like 5 feet wide. Like it's landing in a 5-foot slot. And the moment I landed down below, Ryan, my ski partner, I see him start to like raise his arms in victory, and then his eyes went really wide, and I saw it. And then there's a voice behind my left ear, in a voice like there shouldn't be a voice there, right? Like at all. No voice should be there right now.
Miles an hour.
Right. It was as you pointed out earlier, I weigh $150 sopping wet. This was like a 210, 220 pound, 6'2" guy.
Disaster.
Entered the chute. At the same time I leaped off the wall, he hit terminal velocity right as he impacted me. So we're mashed together, literally almost face to face, right? And we're flipping down a 5-foot wide corridor between lava walk walls, and I can see the lava rock flipping past my eyes.
Fuck outta here,
and I'm
dude.
my brain is literally like, the chances that two entangled skiers could tomahawk down a lava without dying here are almost minuscule. And I'm like, yeah, thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Like,
I love how it ended too. He goes, "You okay? Yeah, you all right?"
well, first of all, I think the dude had lost. Like, he knew he was super at fault. I think he knew. Like, he
Let's
was
get out of here. See you later. You
See,
dropped
bye.
something. Sorry.
You're
Sorry
alive.
about
Okay,
your-
bye.
Sorry about your life. Sorry about your spine.
Sorry about the fact that
Chest contusion.
No, he managed to almost completely sever my left rotator cuff. We didn't even know it until the end of the season when I actually, I went to go get my knees looked at, and I was like, my left shoulder's been a little weird since that accident. When you take a look at it, it was like, it's hanging on by a single thread.
Did you do operation or stem
No,
cells?
I did. I did
Rich.
exosomes and stem cells and exosomes, and
My wife has a torn rotator cuff, and I want to.
I've done with torn rotator cuffs. I've had 5 of them. I've done 2 surgeries, which are the most miserable, awful things ever, and they
suck.
take a year and a half to heal, and they're shitty.
They say 6 weeks. That's all bullshit. I love it. Yeah.
PRP, which if it'll work, doesn't work for everybody, was amazing for me. I've fixed both rotator cuffs on either side very quick. PRP, and then with exosomes.
What are exosomes?
They're what stem cells, which were the big thing in regenerative medicine. One of the problems with there's all kinds of health related, this could cause cancer type of maybe issues. But the biggest problem with stem cells were they would inject them into people into the wound site, and they would leave. They'd stick around for 2 or 3 days, and then they'd be gone. And what they started to realize is the things you want are what the stem cells actually secrete, which are exosomes, and they're wound healing or healing properties, or they'll recruit other cells that will heal properties. And I think I treated the rotator cuff with 1 round of exosomes, in, out, and done, and I've not had any problems with it.
Damn.
PRP, I had to do 2 rounds, but I think with the shoulder, I literally did 1 round. That was one of the things that this is not a book about regenerative medicine. That's not really my field. I don't do longevity science. I don't do regenerative medicine. You and I sort of share similar skepticism.
Nobody gets out of this thing alive.
Around it. That said, I have been playing with regenerative medicine now experimentally on myself as a guinea pig since 2000. And it was a joke until PRP showed up in around 2012, 13, and started to get good. And that was sort of second round of, and now it's at the 3rd level of regenerative medicine. And I still, for a lot of the diseases, a lot of the functional medical stuff, I still think it's crap. I'm not, but for orthopedic stuff, I have torn this, I have broken this, I have damaged this. It's starting to get very, 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 very good.
That's great to hear. So let's conclude this. Do you have a philosophy on nutrition?
Yes.
You do. You're such a walking dichotomy.
I'm not.
'Cause you
No.
break
My
everything,
philosophy
you go
on
crazy.
nutrition was I don't have a philosophy on nutrition. Literally, my feeling on nutrition
love
is
that.
this. 1,
I love that.
we're very clear on this. There is no one diet that will work for everyone. Right. 2, let me tell you a funny story, because the nutrition crowd loves flow stuff, right? They love, and there's never, ever, flow is a high energy state. So you would presume you need high quality food to produce that energy and lots of hydration. And that's what we tell people. And that's what I try to live by, and et cetera, et cetera. True story. I wanted to know at a personal level, if there was any relationship between what I ate before I went skiing and getting into flow. So I did a 10-year study on myself. What did I eat before I went skiing? Did I get into flow? How deep of a flow state after a decade? The only correlation I found is on the days that I didn't have time, was running late, didn't make breakfast, didn't eat at home, and I stopped at a gas station, most of the time bought truck store donuts, right? That's when I got into the most flow. So after 10 years of trying to find this nutrition correlate that blah, 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 no, actually cheap Hostess donuts from the fucking gas station, because I'm skinny and I burn a lot of energy.
Also, nothing says I don't give a fuck like Hostess
donuts.
And part of getting in flow is saying I don't give a fuck. Let's go. There are rocks down there, but I'm taking the jump.
I'm taking it anyways.
I'm going to end this with this. I compliment you with this because A lot of guys I've read and interviewed a lot of authors who have written a lot of books and on subjects like this and others. And one of the things that I always find is that they didn't live it. They just read about it. And I don't think you can really learn life by just reading about it and hearing about it. And you went out and did it.
Yeah, you got to do both. I think.
It's like Goethe read Newton's treatise on light. He read his 1,400-page volume on the properties of light. This is Goethe, who wrote Faust, etc. And Goethe said...
By the way, Goethe actually coined the word for flow. The first time flow is used in Western languages is Goethe, and the word is Rausch, which is overflowing joy. And Goethe was trying to figure out the Bacchanese Dionysian passion at Oktoberfest, at German beer festivals, when everybody got swept up in the moment. They called that Rausch. And it was the first showing up of flow. And when Nietzsche, who was the first person to actually work on flow, he was working on Rausch. He was working on
talk about full circle. So then this story is very apropos and appropriate. And he said, I read that miserable treatise on light and all, as a father of science. I read 1,400 pages about the properties of light. And yet he told me nothing and taught me nothing about beauty, which is the whole point of learning about light, because the world is made of beauty. And I think that was a classic example of somebody who's theoretical versus somebody who lives life. What's the point of life if you can't
I always
see
thought this was my advantage doing flow research, is that I know almost all the scientists in the flow world, and I will tell you that the ones who got farther than most were all athletes. Yeah. Arne Dietrich was a marathon runner. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi was a rock climber and a mountain. Right, like the people who actually advance flow science.
Come into contact with objective reality. You got to feel the ground under you.
It's helpful. I find it helpful.
Fucking A. Thanks, Stephen Kotler, for coming out here. This was awesome.
Thank you, Bryan.
Sorry about the view.
No, it's well, I've just been looking at the back of your kitchen. You get the view.
Dude,
you put me in the cheap seat.
I should have put you in the seat. I meant to put you in the seat. I blame Dylan, my fucking engineer, producer.
Hi, Dylan.
He's the best.
No, it's the what?
That was my bad.
It's the Virginia Woolf line. I think it's Virginia Woolf. I love a room with a view. I just want to sit with my back to it.